You want to know how I destroyed my son's wedding in under 3 minutes flat? Simple. The bride made the mistake of whispering in my ear. Most people think I'm just some sweet old widow who bakes casseroles and minds her business. They see the gray hair, the sensible shoes, the reading glasses on a chain around my neck, and they think, harmless. Veronica Crane thought that. She thought wrong. You've served your purpose, old woman, she breathed into my ear, champagne on her breath, diamonds glittering at her throat. Her smile never wavered for the 200 guests milling behind us. Time for you to disappear. Permanently. She patted my arm like I was a well-behaved pet. My son Daniel stood 20 feet away, laughing with his groomsmen, no idea his new bride had just threatened his mother's life. I could have cried. I could have gasped. I could have made a scene. I didn't. I laughed. I laughed right in her perfect porcelain face, loud enough that 3 people turned. Her smile flickered. Sweetheart, I said, you just made the worst mistake of your miserable little life. She blinked. Excuse me? You see that man by the cake table? The one with the limp and the scars you think you buried 3 years ago? She turned. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Frank raised his glass to her and smiled. That's your second husband, isn't it? I said. The one you reported dead. The one whose tragic boating accident was ruled a homicide. The one who's been waiting 3 years to see this exact look on your face. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. The FBI is outside, I continued. So is the county sheriff. So is a lovely reporter from the Tribune who's very interested in a story about a serial bride who marries men, drains their families dry, and stages accidents for the inconvenient ones. She grabbed my wrist. Her nails dug in. You lying old bitch. I didn't flinch. Frank survived, Vera. He crawled out of that lake with 2 broken legs and a collapsed lung, and he's been waiting. Just waiting. For this exact moment. She let go of my wrist like I'd burned her. Checkmate, I said. She ran. Right into the arms of Sheriff Kowalski, who'd been standing directly behind her for the last 30 seconds, listening to every word. The handcuffs clicked. The music stopped. And my son finally turned around. 6 weeks earlier, I was sitting in my kitchen at 4 in the morning, staring at a photograph of a dead woman who looked exactly like my future daughter-in-law. The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago. The dogs were snoring under the table. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled and then shut up, the way they do when they find something to kill. I rubbed my husband's dog tags between my thumb and forefinger, back and forth, until the metal felt warm. That habit started the night 2 Army officers showed up on my porch to tell me a roadside bomb had turned my 40-year marriage into a folded flag. Now it just meant I was thinking hard enough to burn a hole through steel. The photograph had arrived in an envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Chicago Sun-Times, dated 8 years ago. The headline read, Local businessman drowns in Lake Michigan, wife questioned and released. Beneath it was a wedding photograph of the couple. The groom was a handsome man in his 50s with kind eyes and a shy smile. The bride, half his age, was lean and blonde and had a diamond on her finger big enough to choke a horse. Her face was Veronica Crane's face. Same high cheekbones. Same cold little smile. Same way of tilting her chin up like she was already measuring you for a coffin. I'd never met the woman before my son brought her home 3 months ago. Now I was looking at evidence that she'd been married before to a man who ended up dead. I wanted it to be a coincidence. I wanted to believe some bitter ex sent me a fake clipping to ruin the wedding. But my gut, the same gut that had told me which soldiers in my triage tent would make it and which wouldn't, was screaming at me to pay attention. At 5 in the morning, I called Linda. Linda Kowalski picked up on the 7th ring, which meant she'd been awake reading case files again. She was retired from the county clerk's office, but she still read legal briefs the way other women her age read romance novels. She always said the best love stories were the ones where the wife got everything in the divorce settlement. I told her about the photograph. I told her about the cold feeling that had settled in my stomach and wouldn't leave. There was a pause on the line. A full 2 seconds. Linda always paused 2 seconds before answering a direct question. It made her sound slow, but I'd known her for 30 years, and I knew that pause meant she was lining up every fact she had like bullets in a magazine. "Send me the clipping," she said. "And don't say a word to Daniel." I wasn't planning to. "Not yet," she said. "Not until we know. That boy's been smiling for the first time since his divorce. If you go at him without proof, Vera will cry, he'll defend her, and you'll be the crazy mother-in-law who can't let go." She was right. I hated that she was right. Daniel was 34 years old and he'd spent the last 3 years convinced he was unlovable. His first wife had cleaned out their savings account and run off with a yoga instructor named River. After that, my son had moved back to the farm, fixed up the old barn, and stopped believing anyone would ever choose him. Then Vera appeared at the diner where he ate breakfast every Tuesday, and suddenly Daniel was smiling again. Suddenly he was talking about the future. Suddenly he was engaged to a woman from Chicago who had no family, no past, and a story about an abusive ex who'd forced her to change her name and start over. Even typing that now, I want to kick myself. It was all right there. The missing history. The vague explanations. The way she always changed the subject whenever I asked about her childhood. But love makes you stupid, and watching your child fall in love makes you stupider. I'd told myself I was being protective. I'd told myself every mother worries about the woman who takes her son away. I'd told myself a lot of lies. Linda called me back at noon. Her voice was tight. "I found him," she said. "The man in the clipping. Harold Bouchard. 57 years old. Owned a small chain of hardware stores outside Chicago. Married Veronica Page Crane 18 months before his death. She was 26. He drowned while they were on a fishing trip. Alone. Just the two of them. The coroner ruled it an accident, but the insurance company flagged it. They paid her out $400,000. She moved to Florida 2 weeks after the funeral. My fingers found the dog tags again. Linda, tell me there's more." Another 2-second pause. Harold Bouchard is not the only one. The kitchen wall seemed to tilt. I put my hand flat on the table to steady myself. "Who else?" "Martin Delgado. Phoenix, Arizona. Married Veronica Crane 6 years ago. Died in a hiking accident 3 months after the wedding. She collected on a life insurance policy he'd taken out 60 days before the marriage. His daughter contested it. Lost. The daughter later died in a car accident. No witnesses." The coffee cup rattled in its saucer. I realized my hand was shaking. "Anyone else?" "Possibly a third. I'm still pulling records. But Maggie, there's a pattern here. Older men. Significant assets. Quick marriages. Quicker deaths. She's never been convicted because there's never been enough evidence, but the FBI has a file on her. An open file. She's a person of interest in 2 states. I closed my eyes. She's marrying my son in 5 weeks. I know. Daniel doesn't have money. The farm's in my name. Why would she target him? The pause lasted longer this time. When Linda spoke again, her voice was careful. "Who does the farm go to if something happens to you?" The question landed like a punch to the sternum. I couldn't breathe for a solid 3 seconds. "Daniel," I whispered. "It all goes to Daniel. The land, the house, the mineral rights, the trust fund my husband set up before he deployed. Everything. And if Daniel is married to Vera when you die?" The answer was so obvious I wanted to scream. "Then she gets half. Or more." "Linda, my God, she's not after him. She's after me." "That's what I think." I stood up so fast the chair tipped over backwards and cracked against the linoleum. Both dogs scrambled to their feet, barking. I didn't even notice. My mind was racing through every interaction I'd had with Vera, every sweet smile, every offer to help me around the house, every time she'd asked about the farm's value, the property lines, the details of the trust. It all rearranged itself into a picture so ugly I felt sick. "She's been studying me," I said. "Like a patient before surgery." "Maggie, sit down. Drink some water. I need you calm for what I'm about to say next." I didn't sit down. "Say it. One of the husbands might be alive." The dogs stopped barking. Or maybe they kept barking and I just couldn't hear them anymore. The whole world went quiet except for the thud of my own heartbeat. "That's impossible. You said he drowned." Harold Bouchard's body was never recovered. The lake was deep, the currents were strong, and the search was called off after 3 days. He was declared legally dead after 5 years. But there's a man living in a small town in Indiana, about 90 miles from here, who checks into a VA hospital every 6 months for a lung condition. His name is Francis Keller. His medical records list extensive scarring consistent with near drowning and 2 improperly healed leg fractures that match the timeline of Bouchard's disappearance. He also has a scar on his forearm that matches a photograph of Harold Bouchard taken at a company picnic 3 months before his death. I was already reaching for my keys. "Maggie, wait." "I'm not waiting. We're in Indiana." "Maggie, listen to me. If Vera finds out you're poking around, she could accelerate her timeline. You and Daniel could both be in danger. She's gotten away with this at least twice. She knows how to make things look like accidents. You need to be careful." I looked out the kitchen window at the farm spread out before me. The corn was coming in thick this year. The barn Daniel had restored was painted red, the exact same shade my husband had always wanted. I'd lived on this land for 40 years, raised a son here, buried a husband here, and no manipulative little fraud with a taste for diamonds was going to take it away from me. Or hurt my boy. "Careful," I said, "is for people who have time. I have 5 weeks. Send me the address." The drive to Indiana took 3 hours. I spent all 3 of them talking to my dead husband. Not out loud, not the kind of talking that gets you committed, but in the quiet way you do when you're alone on a highway and the radio doesn't work and the only voice you need to hear is the one you've been missing for 12 years. "Tom," I kept thinking, "you would have spotted her in 10 minutes. You always said I was too trusting. You said my faith in people was going to get me killed one day. Well, look at me now, driving to Indiana to track down a dead man because our future daughter-in-law might be a murderer." The dog tags felt heavy around my neck. Francis Keller lived in a trailer park on the edge of a town called Millbrook. It was the kind of place where the mailboxes were rusted and the lawns were mostly dirt and the only sound was the hum of a single window unit air conditioner struggling against the humidity. I knocked on his door at 2 in the afternoon and waited. The man who opened it was thin and stooped, with gray stubble and eyes that had seen things he'd never talk about. He leaned on a cane and breathed in short, wet rasps. But beneath the damage, beneath the years and the pain, I recognized the kind eyes from the newspaper photograph. "Harold Bouchard?" I said. He flinched like I'd thrown a punch. His hand tightened on the doorframe. "My name is Francis Keller," he said. His voice was a rasp, barely a whisper. "Harold Bouchard is dead. I know the story. I know about the lake. I know about your wife. I know she's about to marry my son." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he stepped aside and let me in. The trailer smelled like menthol rub and old coffee. Every surface was covered in pill bottles and breathing treatments and dog-eared paperback westerns. He lowered himself into a recliner with the kind of careful movement that told me every joint in his body hurt all the time. I sat on the edge of a folding chair and waited. "She tried to kill you," I said. It wasn't a question. Frank, because that's who he was now, no matter what name he used, nodded slowly. "We were fishing. I was reeling in a base. She hit me in the back of the head with an oar. When I woke up I was in the water and she was rowing away. The boat was filling up. She'd drilled holes in the hull before we left shore. I said nothing. What could you possibly say to that? I swam for 2 hours. Broke my legs on the rocks when I finally hit shore. Crawled into the woods and passed out. A ranger found me the next morning, half dead. I told him who I was. I told him my wife tried to kill me. And then I thought about it, lying in that hospital bed, and I realized something terrible. What? The police weren't going to believe me. She'd already told them I'd been drinking. That I'd fallen overboard. She was the grieving widow, crying on every news channel. And I was the drunk who'd almost drowned himself and left his poor wife traumatized. I had no proof. No witnesses. Nothing except my word against hers, and she was very, very good at being believed. I rubbed the dog tags. So you disappeared. I let Harold Bouchard die. It was the only way to survive. If she thought I was dead, she'd stop looking. If I pressed charges and lost, she'd finish the job. So I became Francis Keller. I moved here. I've been waiting ever since. Waiting for what? He looked at me then, and I saw something flicker in those tired eyes. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. For someone like you to show up, he said. For proof that she was doing it again. For a chance to finally stop her. I leaned forward. I'm going to do more than stop her. I'm going to destroy her. But I need your help. He coughed into a handkerchief. It came away spotted with blood. I'm dying, Mrs. Bennet. Slowly, but surely. My lungs are shot. Another year, maybe 2. I've got nothing left to lose. What do you need? I told him. I told him about the wedding, 5 weeks away. I told him about Linda's research, the FBI file, the other men who died. I told him about my son, who was good and kind and desperately lonely, and about Vera, who had wrapped herself around him like a vine around a tree. I told him my plan. It wasn't a perfect plan. It had holes and risks and about a dozen ways it could go wrong. But it was built on one simple truth: Vera thought she was the smartest person in every room. She thought she was invincible. She thought no one would ever catch her. She was about to learn that some rooms are bigger than they look, and some old women have very long memories. Frank listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he sat in silence for almost a minute. Then he smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. It was a thin, painful smile, but it was real. I'll need a suit, he said. I assume I'm invited to the wedding. You're going to be the guest of honor, I said. The next 4 weeks were a blur of phone calls and photocopies and late-night meetings in Linda's basement. She'd set up a command center down there, surrounded by boxes of case files and a whiteboard covered in timelines and financial records. We pieced together Vera's entire history. 3 confirmed marriages, 2 confirmed deaths, 1 near miss. Assets totaling over $1 million drained from the estates of men who'd trusted her. A trail of grieving families who'd been told it was all just tragic accidents. And all of it, every single piece, was legal. She'd been questioned. She'd been investigated. But she'd never been charged. She was too careful, too clean. The insurance companies had paid out because they had to. The families had buried their loved ones and tried to move on. She was going to do the same thing to my son. She was going to marry Daniel, wait a few months, and then stage an accident so perfect that no one would ever prove otherwise. And she would walk away with half of everything I'd spent a lifetime building. Over my dead body. Literally. Here's the thing I don't understand, Linda said one night, highlighting yet another bank record. Why the rush? She could marry Daniel, wait a year, 2 years, collect insurance, it's all clean. Why is she pushing for a quick wedding? I thought about it. The answer came to me in the middle of the night, the way the worst answers always do. Because of me, I said the next morning. I'm the variable. She can't control me. I ask too many questions. I've already made it clear I don't trust her. She knows that the longer I'm around, the more likely I am to figure it out. She needs me gone before I become a threat. Linda's face went pale. She's not going to wait months. She's going to do something soon. How soon? The wedding is in a week. After that, you're her mother-in-law. You have access to her, she has access to you. Accidents happen in farmhouses all the time. A fall down the stairs. A gas leak in the kitchen. An allergic reaction that nobody could have predicted. I started sleeping with a loaded shotgun next to my bed. Not a pretty image, I know. But I'd been an army nurse in a combat zone, and I'd learned that the best way to survive a threat is to take it seriously before it takes you. The wedding day arrived gray and humid, the kind of day where the church door sticks and everyone's collar feels too tight. I helped Daniel with his tie in the back room of the church, the same room where I'd dressed him for his first communion 30 years ago. He was shaking a little, but he was smiling. He looked so happy. So hopeful. My heart was breaking. "Mom," he said, "I know you and Vera haven't always seen eye to eye." That's one way to put it. He laughed a little. "I just want you to know, she really does love me. She's good for me. She makes me want to be better." I straightened his tie and smoothed his collar. I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone in a farmhouse full of memories, and I wanted to wrap him in my arms and never let go. "Daniel," I said, "there are some things I need to tell you. Not today. But after the wedding. Promise me you'll listen. No matter how hard it is." He frowned. "Mom, what's going on?" "Promise me." "I promise." But. The organ music started. The door opened. The wedding coordinator gave us a frantic wave. Daniel squeezed my hand and walked out to take his place at the altar. I stayed in the back room for another minute. I touched the dog tags one last time. Then I walked out to find my seat, nodding at Frank across the aisle, and waited for the bride to seal her own fate. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give her that. Vera floated down the aisle in a white dress that probably cost more than my first tractor. She looked at Daniel with tears in her eyes. She recited her vows with a trembling voice. She looked, for all the world, like a woman madly in love. It was the performance of her lifetime. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. I clapped along with everyone else, my face a mask of maternal joy. Frank, sitting 3 rows behind me, caught my eye and nodded once. The reception was held in the church hall. White tablecloths, fairy lights, a 3-tier cake with real flowers. 200 people ate and drank and laughed. Daniel and Vera had their first dance. People toasted the happy couple. I stood in the corner and watched the clock. And then, just as the cake was being cut, Vera found me. She slipped up beside me with a glass of champagne and a smile that could freeze whiskey. Daniel was across the room, deep in conversation with an old college friend. No one was watching us. No one ever was. "You've served your purpose, old woman," she whispered. "Time for you to disappear. Permanently." I laughed. And the rest, as they say, is history. Except it wasn't history yet. Not quite. Because while Vera was busy running into Sheriff Kowalski's arms, while the guests were gasping and the camera phones were flashing and the reporter from the Tribune was scribbling furiously in her notepad, my son was walking toward me. He walked right past his new bride, handcuffed and screaming. He walked past Frank, who was leaning on his cane and watching the chaos with quiet satisfaction. He walked past Linda, who was already on the phone with the FBI field office. He walked straight to me, and he stopped 2 feet away, and his face was a battlefield of confusion and horror and something that looked a whole lot like gratitude. "Mom," he said. "What did you do?" I reached up and straightened his tie, just like I'd done before the ceremony. It was crooked. Wedding ties always end up crooked. I saved your life, baby, I said. Now sit down. The FBI wants to talk to you about your wife. And Frank over there has a story you need to hear. The FBI agent's name was Chen, and she had the kind of face that had seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by any of it. She sat across from me in the church's side office, the same room where I'd straightened Daniel's tie an hour ago, and she laid out photographs on the desk like a poker player showing a winning hand. Harold Bouchard. Martin Delgado. A third man I hadn't known about named Gerald Fitzpatrick, who'd died in a garage fire in Ohio 4 years ago. 3 wedding photos. 3 death certificates. 3 life insurance payouts totaling just under $2 million. Mrs. Bennett, Agent Chen said, we've been building a case against Veronica Crane for 6 years. We've never had a living witness before tonight. Frank sat in the corner, his cane propped against the wall. He'd been talking for 40 minutes, his raspy voice steady as he described the fishing trip, the oar, the cold water closing over his head. Agent Chen had recorded every word. So had the Tribune reporter, who'd been escorted out 10 minutes ago but not before she'd gotten enough material for 3 front-page stories. I want to see her, I said. Agent Chen looked at me. That's not standard procedure. I don't care about standard procedure. I want to see her face. There was a long pause. Then Agent Chen stood up and opened the door. They'd put Vera in the choir room, which I thought was fitting. She was handcuffed to a metal folding chair, her white dress pooling around her like spilled milk. Her veil was gone. Her hair was coming undone. But her eyes, when she looked up at me, were still sharp. Still calculating. Still looking for an angle. Mother, she said. She made the word sound like a curse. I'm not your mother. I'm the woman who just ended your career. She laughed. It was a brittle sound, like ice cracking underfoot. You think this is over? You think some washed-up ex-husband with a grudge and a retired secretary playing detective are going to put me away? I have lawyers. Good ones. I'll be out before sunrise. Those lawyers might want to negotiate their fees, I said. Because I froze your accounts 2 hours ago. Every account. The one in Chicago. The one in Phoenix. The offshore one in the Caymans that you thought nobody knew about. Her smile flickered. Just for a second. But I saw it. Linda Kowalski, I said. She spent 30 years in the county clerk's office. She knows every judge, every attorney, every back-channel filing trick in the state. She filed an emergency motion to freeze your assets at 4 o'clock this afternoon, before the wedding even started. You're broke, Vera. You can't afford a public defender, let alone a good one. The mask slipped a little more. Her jaw tightened. That's illegal, she whispered. So is murdering 3 husbands. But here we are. She lunged against the handcuffs. The metal chair scraped across the floor. Agent Chen stepped forward, but I held up my hand. I wasn't afraid of her. Not anymore. The woman who'd terrified me for weeks was just a person now, a small and desperate person in a ruined dress, and I'd seen worse in my triage tent. I'd held soldiers' hands while they bled out and told them lies about how they were going to make it. This woman had never scared me. She'd only disgusted me. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Agent Chen is going to take you to the federal building in Indianapolis. Frank is going to give a full statement. So is the family of Martin Delgado, who Linda called this morning. So is the daughter of Gerald Fitzpatrick, who's been waiting 4 years for someone to finally believe her father didn't set that fire himself. Vera's face went white. 3 families, I said. 3 dead men. 1 living witness. And a paper trail that goes back a decade. You're not getting out of this. Not this time. Not ever again. You can't prove anything, she said. But her voice was smaller now. The ice was melting. I don't have to prove anything. Frank already did. He told them about the holes in the boat. He told them about the insurance policy you took out 60 days before the trip. He told them about the phone call you made the night before, to a number in Florida that matches the name of a man who was later convicted of insurance fraud. You didn't work alone, did you, Vera? She said nothing. Agent Chen is very interested in that phone call. She's also interested in the text messages you deleted from Daniel's phone last month. The ones where you asked him to increase his life insurance policy and make you the sole beneficiary. He told you no. That's when you decided to speed things up, isn't it? That's when you decided to come after me. Her lips pressed together until they were a thin white line. She smoothed her sleeve over her wrist. The gesture was automatic, unconscious, and it told me everything I needed to know. She was already spinning lies in her head, already trying to find a way out, already preparing to tell whoever would listen that she was the victim here. But her sleeve was torn. There was a bruise forming on her wrist from where the handcuffs had tightened. The perfect image was crumbling. I almost feel sorry for you, I said. Don't you dare. No, I mean it. You could have been anything. You're smart. You're determined. You've got more nerve than most generals I've known. And you spent it all destroying people. You spent it all chasing money you didn't earn from men who only wanted to love you. What a waste. She looked up at me, and for 1 second, the mask was gone completely. Beneath it was something I hadn't expected. Not rage. Not defiance. Just exhaustion. A bone-deep weariness that looked a lot like relief. You don't know anything about me, she said. Then tell me. The pause stretched out. Agent Chen shifted her weight. Frank coughed in the other room. Somewhere outside, a car engine started and then faded away. I was 14, Vera said quietly. My stepfather had a house on the North Shore. Big white columns. Swimming pool. He drove a Mercedes and wore suits that cost more than my mother made in a year. He said he loved us. He said he'd take care of us. And then he threw us out. In January. In Chicago. Because he got bored. He got bored of my mother and he got bored of me and he just threw us out. Like we were garbage. She looked at me. Her eyes were dry, but they were burning. My mother died 3 years later. No insurance. No savings. Nothing. And he's still in that house. Still driving that Mercedes. Still wearing those suits. So yes, I learned something. I learned that the only person who takes care of you is you. I learned that men take what they want and throw away the rest. I decided I would be the one doing the taking. I said nothing. What was there to say? She'd been broken by someone who should have protected her, and instead of healing, she'd turned the broken pieces into weapons. I understood it. I didn't forgive it. But I understood it. That doesn't excuse what you did, I said. No. It doesn't. Agent Chen stepped forward and took Vera by the arm. Time to go. Vera stood up. Her dress rustled against the floor. At the door, she paused and looked back at me. Your son, she said. Is he okay? The question caught me off guard. There was no sarcasm in it. No manipulation. Just a quiet, almost gentle curiosity that didn't fit anything I knew about her. He will be, I said. Eventually. She nodded. He's one of the good ones. I almost didn't go through with it. With him. But I was in too deep. I couldn't figure out how to stop. All you had to do was leave. She smiled. A real smile this time, small and sad. Leaving isn't something I know how to do. Agent Chen led her out. The door closed behind them. I sat down in the metal folding chair she'd just vacated, and I put my head in my hands, and I let myself breathe for the first time in 5 weeks. I found Daniel in the church sanctuary. He was sitting in the front pew, still in his tuxedo, staring at the cross above the altar. The stained glass behind it was dark now, the evening light gone, and the only illumination came from a single row of candles flickering near the pulpit. Frank sat 3 rows behind him. They weren't talking. They were just sitting there together, 2 men who'd both been betrayed by the same woman, keeping some kind of silent vigil I didn't want to interrupt. But Daniel turned when he heard my footsteps. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying anymore. He looked like a man who'd been hit by a truck and was still trying to figure out if he was alive. "Mom," he said. "Frank told me everything. About the lake. About the other men. About what she was going to do to you." I sat down beside him. The pew creaked. That same old creak I'd been hearing since I brought him here as a baby for his baptism, the third pew from the front, left side, the one with the crack in the wood that always pinched your leg if you sat wrong. "I should have told you sooner," I said. "Why didn't you?" "Because you were happy. Because you'd been sad for so long, and I couldn't stand the thought of being the one to take that happiness away. Even if it was fake. Even if it was built on lies. I wanted to give you a few more weeks of it. That was selfish. I'm sorry." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She asked me to change my life insurance policy. A month ago. She said it was just standard, just something married couples do. I told her no because it felt wrong. I told her no and she got so angry. I'd never seen her angry like that. And I still didn't see it. You saw it. You just didn't want to believe it. Same thing." "No. Not the same thing. Love makes you blind, but it doesn't make you stupid. You saw something was wrong and you said no. That took guts. That probably saved both our lives." He turned to look at me. His eyes were wet now, but he was holding it together. My son, who'd been through a divorce and a betrayal and a near miss with a serial predator, was holding it together. I'd never been prouder of him in my life. "Frank says he's been hiding for 3 years, Daniel said. Living in a trailer park, waiting for someone to believe him. He said you were the first person who did." Linda believed him. She found him. "But you went. You drove 3 hours to a stranger's trailer and you asked him to face the woman who tried to kill him. Who does that?" I reached up and straightened his tie again. It was a habit I couldn't break. Every time I saw him in a suit, I had to fix the tie. His father was the same way. Tom couldn't walk past a mirror without adjusting his collar, even when it was already perfect. "Your father," I said, "once carried a wounded soldier 3 miles through enemy fire. He got shot twice doing it. When they asked him why he did it, he said, because he was my brother and I don't leave family behind. That's who does that. That's who we are. You, me, this farm, this family. We don't leave people behind." Daniel looked at Frank. Frank looked back at him. Something passed between them, some silent understanding I couldn't read. "Mr. Keller," Daniel said. "Frank. I know you don't know me. But I want to apologize for what she did to you. She came into your life and she destroyed it, and I brought her into mine without knowing any better. I almost let her do it again. I'm sorry." Frank shook his head slowly. "You don't owe me an apology, son. You're a victim here, same as me. I'm not a victim. I'm an idiot who almost got his mother killed." "That's not how she'd tell it," Frank said, nodding toward me. "And I suspect she's the one who gets the final word on that." I almost laughed. Almost. But the sound caught in my throat, and what came out was something between a laugh and a sob, and then Daniel's arms were around me and I was crying into his tuxedo jacket and I didn't care who saw. I'd held it together for 5 weeks. I'd held it together through the investigation and the planning and the confrontation and the arrest. I'd been strong because I had to be strong. But now the danger was past and my son was safe and the dam I'd built around my heart was crumbling into dust. "It's okay, Mom," Daniel whispered. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." "I know," I choked out. "I know you're not. That's why I'm crying, you idiot. Frank coughed politely and excused himself. The sanctuary door opened and closed with a soft thud. The candles flickered. The cross above us watched in silence. I pulled back and wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I ruined your wedding, I said. Yeah. The cake was probably terrible anyway. I saw the bakery truck. It said discount. Daniel stared at me. Then he laughed. A real laugh, surprised and sudden, the kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep and won't be stopped. Mom, you just got my wife arrested by the FBI and you're worried about the cake? I paid for that cake. I'm entitled to an opinion. He laughed harder. And then I was laughing too, both of us sitting in the front pew of an empty church at 10 o'clock at night, laughing like people who'd survived something terrible and were just now realizing they'd made it through. It was inappropriate and unhinged and probably disrespectful to the sanctuary, but I didn't care. Tom would have laughed too. He would have laughed the loudest of all. The cleanup took 3 days. Not the legal stuff, that would take months. The physical cleanup, the dismantling of a wedding that should never have happened. Linda organized a crew of women from the church who packed up the decorations and returned the rented chairs and donated the flowers to the nursing home. She didn't ask any questions. She just showed up with a clipboard and a thermos of coffee and started giving orders. That woman could have run a small country if she'd wanted to. The gifts were returned. The dress was bagged and given to a charity that provided formal wear for underprivileged girls. The cake, as it turned out, was actually pretty good. I ate 3 pieces standing over the kitchen sink at 2 in the morning, not because I was hungry, but because I'd paid for it and I'd be damned if I let it go to waste. The news coverage was relentless for about 48 hours. The Tribune ran the story on the front page, complete with a photograph of Vera being led out of the church in handcuffs. The national outlets picked it up. Some producer from a true crime podcast left me 7 voicemails. I deleted all of them without listening. I had no interest in being famous. I had even less interest in reliving the worst day of my son's life for the entertainment of strangers. Frank stayed in the guest room for a week. He and Daniel spent hours talking on the porch, their voices low, their chairs turned toward the soybean fields. I didn't eavesdrop. Some conversations are private, and a man who'd lost 3 years of his life to hiding deserved privacy. But sometimes I'd bring them iced tea and catch fragments. Frank was telling Daniel about Harold Bouchard's hardware stores, about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands, about the way Vera had walked into his life at exactly the moment he'd been most vulnerable. A recent divorce. A daughter who'd stopped speaking to him. A business that was struggling. She'd been a lighthouse in the fog, or so he'd thought. In reality, she'd been the rocks. She has a gift, Frank said one evening. She sees the crack in people. The place where they're broken. And she fills it with exactly what they need to hear. Daniel nodded. She told me I deserved better than my ex-wife. She told me I was a good man who'd been treated badly. She told me she'd never hurt me. Because that's what you needed to hear. Yes. And you believed it because you wanted to believe it. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I set the iced tea on the table between them and turned to go, but he caught my hand. Mom, he said. When did you know? Really know? I sat down on the porch railing. The wood creaked. The third board was loose again. I'd been meaning to fix it for 3 summers. I wanted to believe her too, I said. For the first few weeks, I told myself I was being paranoid. Overprotective. The crazy old widow who couldn't let her son grow up. But then the little things started adding up. She knew too much about the farm's value. She asked about the trust fund your father set up, the one that only activates if I'm gone. She asked about my health, my medications, my doctor's appointments. She was too interested in the details of my life. Not in a caring way. In a cataloging way. Like she was taking inventory. Daniel's jaw tightened. And I didn't see any of it. You weren't supposed to see it. That's how she works. She makes you feel like you're the center of the universe so you don't notice her circling the edges, looking for weakness. Frank nodded slowly. She did the same to me. She was the perfect wife for 18 months. Attentive. Loving. Supportive. I thought I'd won the lottery. And then one day she suggested a fishing trip. Just the two of us. Alone. On the lake. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We all knew how that story ended. Frank, I said, what are you going to do now? After the trial? He looked out at the fields. The sun was setting, painting the corn in shades of gold and orange. A breeze moved through the stalks, making them whisper. I've been hiding for 3 years, he said. I'm tired of hiding. I think I'd like to find my daughter. Tell her the truth. She thinks I abandoned her. She thinks I was a drunk who fell off a boat and left her with nothing. Vera made sure of that. She told my daughter things, poisoned her against me, so that when I died there would be no one left to ask questions. Do you know where she is? Last I heard, she was in Tennessee. Married, 2 kids. I've never met my grandchildren. I looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at me. Something passed between us, the same silent understanding I'd seen in the church sanctuary. We could help you find her, Daniel said. If you want. I'm pretty good with the internet. And Linda knows how to track down anyone. Frank's eyes glistened. He blinked hard and looked away. I couldn't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. The breeze picked up. The corn whispered louder. Somewhere down the road, a dog started barking, and another one answered it, the way dogs do when the evening comes and they're calling each other home. I'd like that, Frank said quietly. I'd like that very much. The trial was 6 months later, and Vera took a plea deal. 3 counts of second-degree murder, reduced from first-degree because she agreed to allocute. To stand up in open court and describe exactly what she'd done. Every detail. Every victim. Every scheme. The prosecution wanted the confession on the record more than they wanted the death penalty. I understood that. Some truths need to be spoken aloud, in public, where the families can hear them. Where the world can hear them. Where there's no more hiding and no more lies and no more pretending. I sat in the 3rd row of the gallery. Daniel sat beside me, his hand in mine. Frank sat on my other side, leaning on his cane, his breathing harsh but steady. Behind us were the families of Martin Delgado and Gerald Fitzpatrick. Martin's daughter, a woman in her 40s with her father's kind eyes, had flown in from Arizona. Gerald's sister, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, had driven 6 hours from Ohio. They'd all been waiting for this day. They'd all been waiting for someone to finally say the words that would let them begin to heal. Vera stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. Her hair was gray now. Her face was hollow. Prison had not been kind to her, and neither had the 6 months of isolation that came before a trial like this one. When she spoke, her voice was flat and mechanical, like she was reading from a script. But the words were hers. The crimes were hers. The confession was hers. She described the fishing trip with Harold Bouchard. The oar. The holes in the boat. The cold water. She described the hiking trip with Martin Delgado, the loose rock she'd pushed him from, the way he'd looked at her in the moment before he fell, understanding finally what she was. She described the garage fire that had killed Gerald Fitzpatrick, the gasoline she'd poured around his workbench, the door she'd locked from the outside so he couldn't escape. The courtroom was silent. Not the silence of indifference. The silence of people trying not to scream. When she finished, the judge asked if anyone wanted to make a victim impact statement. Martin Delgado's daughter stood up. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. She talked about the father who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd read her bedtime stories, who'd believed in her when no one else did. She talked about the years she'd spent blaming him for his own death, thinking he'd been careless, thinking he'd left her by choice. Vera had stolen not just her father, but her memory of him. Her faith in him. The comfort of grieving a good man who'd loved her. Gerald Fitzpatrick's sister spoke next. She didn't stand. She couldn't. But her voice carried through the courtroom like a bell. She talked about Gerald the boy, the brother who'd protected her from bullies, the teenager who'd worked 3 jobs to help their mother pay rent. She talked about the man he'd become, the business he'd built, the life he'd deserved. And then she talked about the fire. The phone call at 2 in the morning. The smell of smoke that had clung to her clothes for weeks afterward. Frank was the last to speak. He stood up slowly, leaning hard on his cane, and walked to the front of the courtroom. He didn't look at Vera. He looked at the judge, and then at the families behind him, and then at me. "My name," he said, "is Harold Francis Bouchard. I've been dead for 3 years. Today, I'm coming back to life." He talked about the lake. He talked about the cold. He talked about crawling onto the shore with 2 broken legs, his lungs full of water, and the sound of her rowing away in the dark. He talked about the years of hiding, the fear, the loneliness, the guilt. The guilt of surviving when other men hadn't. The guilt of knowing he might have stopped her if he'd been braver, if he'd come forward sooner, if he hadn't been so afraid. "But I'm here now," he said. "I'm here, and I'm telling the truth, and she can't hurt anyone else. That's enough. That's what I came to say." He turned then and looked at Vera. She didn't look back. She stared straight ahead at the wall, her face blank, her hands cuffed in front of her. "Goodbye, Veronica," Frank said. "I hope you find whatever it is you've been looking for." "I don't think you will. But I hope you do." He walked back to his seat. His cane clicked against the floor. Click. 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 And then he sat down beside me and let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 3 years. The judge sentenced Vera to life without parole. She would die in prison. There would be no appeal, no second chances, no more husbands, no more accidents, no more widows weeping over caskets they didn't know should have been empty. The gavel came down. The bailiff led her away. And the families, the 3 broken families who'd waited so long for justice, finally let themselves weep. I took Frank to breakfast after the trial. A diner in town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a pie case that spun slowly under warm lights. We sat by the window and watched the morning traffic roll past. Frank ordered pancakes. I ordered coffee and a slice of apple pie, because if you can't eat pie for breakfast on the day your son's would-be murderer gets sent to prison, when can you? "She didn't fight it," Frank said. "The plea deal." "She didn't fight anything." "I thought she would." "I know. I thought so too." "Why didn't she?" I thought about the choir room. The torn sleeve. The bruise on her wrist. The way she'd asked about Daniel, whether he was okay, and meant it. "I think she was tired," I said. "I think she'd been running for so long she forgot what it felt like to stand still. And I think, in some weird way, part of her wanted to get caught. Wanted someone to finally stop her. Because she couldn't stop herself." Frank nodded slowly. "She was 14. When her stepfather threw her out. She told me that once. The only true thing she ever told me. She was 14 years old, and her mother was dying, and the man who was supposed to protect them threw them out like garbage." "I know. She told me too. It doesn't excuse it." "No," I said. "It doesn't. But it explains something. Doesn't it?" I stared into my coffee. The waitress refilled my cup without asking. She was a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Beth. She'd probably seen 100 people like us, sitting in booths having quiet conversations about terrible things. Diners were good for that. They held your secrets without judgment and sent you home with a full stomach and a lighter heart. "Frank," I said, "what are you going to do now?" "Really?" He smiled. A real smile this time, not the thin painful one I'd seen in his trailer 6 months ago. Daniel helped me find my daughter. She's in Nashville. We've been talking on the phone. She wants me to come visit. Meet the grandkids. That's wonderful. It's terrifying. I haven't seen her in 7 years. She thinks I'm dead. She's had to grieve me twice now, once when I disappeared and once when she found out I'd been alive the whole time and hadn't told her. She's angry. She has a right to be. She'll forgive you. How do you know? Because she's been talking to you on the phone. Because she invited you to visit. Because she wants to meet her grandchildren. People don't do that if they're not willing to try. He was quiet for a moment, pushing his pancakes around his plate. Then he looked up at me with those kind eyes, the ones I'd first seen in a newspaper photograph of a dead man, and he said, "You know, I never thanked you." For what? For driving to Indiana. For believing me. For giving me a reason to stop hiding. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. His fingers were cold, the way they always were. Poor circulation. A side effect of nearly drowning, the doctors said. His body had never fully recovered from the hours he'd spent in that cold lake. It never would. You don't need to thank me, I said. You needed help. I needed a witness. It was a fair trade. He laughed. A fair trade. You're something else, Maggie Bennett. So I've been told. The diner door swung open. The little bell above it jingled. Daniel walked in, spotted us, and slid into the booth next to me. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt and he looked better than he had in months. Younger. Lighter. Like a man who'd been carrying a weight he didn't know was there until someone finally took it off his shoulders. Thought I'd find you here, he said. Linda called. She said the Tribune wants to do a follow-up story. Human interest angle. Small-town widow takes down serial bride. She told them you'd probably hang up on them. She was right. I figured. I'll tell her to pass. He stole a bite of Frank's pancakes. Frank pretended to swat his fork away. The two of them had developed an easy rhythm over the past months, a friendship built on shared trauma and long porch conversations and something that looked a lot like mutual respect. It was good to see. For both of them. Actually, I said, tell Linda to give them one quote. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What quote? I thought about it for a moment. The waitress came back with more coffee. The pie case kept spinning. Outside, a truck rumbled past, and a dog barked, and the sun climbed higher over the soybean fields. Tell them, I said, that Margaret Bennett has no comment, but she wants everyone to know one thing. What's that? If you come after my family, you'd better bring an army. Because I've faced worse than you. And I'm still here. The thing about winning is that it doesn't feel like winning. Not at first. At first it feels like standing in the rubble of a building that just collapsed and trying to figure out which pieces are still worth saving. I spent the week after the trial doing what I always do when my mind won't sit still. I fixed things. The loose board on the porch. The sticky kitchen drawer. The fence post the neighbor's bull knocked over last spring. There's something holy about manual labor, about putting your hands on something broken and making it whole again. The farm had been falling apart in small ways for years, ever since Tom died, and I'd been too busy or too tired or too stubborn to notice. Now I noticed everything. Every cracked hinge. Every peeling paint. Every weed pushing up through the gravel drive. Daniel found me in the barn on a Thursday afternoon, covered in sawdust, rebuilding a stall door that had been hanging crooked since the Clinton administration. He leaned against the post and watched me work for a full minute before he said anything. My son had always been good at silence. He got that from his father. Linda called, he said. The FBI officially closed the case. Dara's been transferred to a federal facility in Texas. Maximum security. She won't be eligible for parole until she's 93 years old. I kept sanding. The wood was rough under my hands. Good. She also said the insurance companies are reopening the claims. The families might get some money back. Not much. Most of it's gone. But something. Good. Daniel was quiet again. I could feel him working up to something. My son was many things, but subtle was not one of them. He shuffled his feet. He cleared his throat. He picked up a hammer and put it down again. Spit it out, I said. I've been thinking about what you said. In the church. Before the wedding. You said there were things you needed to tell me, and you made me promise to listen. I stopped sanding. I remember. I'm listening now. I set down the sandpaper and wiped my hands on my jeans. The barn smelled like hay and old leather and the faint ghost of the horses we used to keep when Daniel was a boy. Dust motes floated in the afternoon light slanting through the cracks in the walls. I'd spent 1,000 hours in this barn, mucking stalls and fixing tack and teaching a small boy how to ride. It was as much a part of me as my own bones. The things I needed to tell you, I said, weren't about Vera. They were about me. About the farm. About what happens after I'm gone. Mom, you don't have to. You promised you'd listen. He closed his mouth. I walked over to the old tack trunk in the corner, the one with the broken latch that Tom always meant to fix. Inside, beneath a stack of old saddle blankets, was a metal lockbox. I'd kept it there for 12 years, ever since the night 2 army officers knocked on my door and handed me a folded flag. I opened it now and pulled out a thick envelope. Your father set up a trust before he deployed for the last time, I said. The farm, the mineral rights, the savings, everything. It all goes to you when I die. But there are conditions. Rules he put in place because he wanted to protect you. From bad decisions. From bad people. From the kind of woman who sees a lonely man and a piece of land and thinks she's found an easy mark. Daniel took the envelope. His hands were shaking slightly. What kind of conditions? The trust has a poison pill clause. If you marry someone who's been convicted of a felony, they get nothing. If you marry someone who contests the trust, they get nothing. If you marry someone who tries to have me declared incompetent or forces me into a nursing home against my will, they get nothing. Your father thought of everything. He always did. Daniel stared at the envelope. You're telling me Vera never had a chance. Even if she'd succeeded. Even if she'd. He couldn't finish the sentence. Even if she'd killed me, I said quietly, she would have gotten nothing. The trust would have frozen automatically pending a full investigation. Linda is the executor. She would have found everything. The fake name. The previous marriages. The suspicious deaths. Vera would have spent years in court, burning through lawyers, and at the end of it all, she would have walked away with exactly $0 and a felony conviction. So everything you did, the investigation, Frank, the wedding, all of it, was to stop her before she hurt you. Before she hurt me. The trust would have protected the farm, but it couldn't protect our lives. Your father knew how to guard money. He didn't know how to guard against a woman who kills people and makes it look like an accident. Daniel opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents, trust papers, and a letter in Tom's handwriting. I'd read it 100 times. I knew every word by heart. He read it in silence. His eyes moved back and forth across the page. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and set it down on the tack trunk. He knew, Daniel said. Dad knew something like this might happen. Your father was a soldier. He spent his whole career planning for worst-case scenarios. He said the best way to win a war was to make sure the enemy never knew what you were defending. So he built walls around this family that no one could see. Not even me. Not until Linda explained it all. Daniel leaned against the stall door. His face was complicated, a mixture of awe and grief and something that looked like anger. Why didn't you tell me any of this before the wedding? Because you wouldn't have believed me. You were in love. You would have said I was being paranoid, that your father was paranoid, that the trust was just legal paperwork and didn't mean anything. You would have married her anyway, and she would have found out about the poison pill clause eventually, and then she would have gotten desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. But they also do terrible things. I couldn't risk it. So you let me walk into that church. You let me say vows. You let me marry a woman you knew was a murderer. I let you see the truth with your own eyes. There's a difference. He was quiet for a long time. The barn creaked around us, settling into the afternoon heat. A fly buzzed against the window. Outside, the soybeans rustled in a breeze I couldn't feel. You should have told me, he said finally. Not about Vera. About Dad. About the trust. About all of it. I'm not a child, Mom. I haven't been for a long time. I know. Then why? I rubbed the dog tags. The metal was warm now, almost hot against my fingers. Because I was afraid too. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of being alone in this house with nothing but memories. Afraid that if I told you the truth about how hard your father worked to protect you, you'd feel like he didn't trust you. And that's not what it was. It was never about trust. It was about love. The kind of love that plans for the worst because you can't bear the thought of it happening. Daniel looked at the envelope. Then at me. Then at the barn around us, the dusty stalls and the old tack and the photographs of his father pinned to the wall. Tom on his horse. Tom in his uniform. Tom holding a newborn Daniel in his arms, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. I miss him, Daniel said. So do I. Every day. He would have known what to do. About Vera. About everything. No, I said. He would have done exactly what I did. He would have protected you. That's all either of us ever wanted. Daniel crossed the barn in 3 steps and wrapped his arms around me. He was taller than me now, taller than his father, and when he hugged me I felt small in a way I never did when I was alone. Small but safe. Small but loved. The sawdust on my clothes transferred to his shirt, and neither of us cared. I'm sorry, he said into my hair. I'm sorry I brought her here. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I almost got you killed. I pulled back and looked at him. You listen to me, Daniel Thomas Bennett. You did not bring her here. She found you. She hunted you. There's a difference. And you did see it. You told her no when she asked you to change the insurance policy. That took courage. That probably saved both of us. So don't you dare apologize for being a good man who trusted the wrong person. Good men trust people. That's what makes them good. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. When did you get so wise? About the time I stopped being young and started being right. He laughed. It was a wet laugh, half tears and half relief, but it was real. I'd take real over perfect any day. Come on, I said. Help me finish this stall door. Then I'll make dinner. Meatloaf. With the crispy edges? Is there any other kind? We worked side by side until the sun went down. He held the boards while I hammered. He swept the floor while I oiled the hinges. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The work was the conversation. The barn was the conversation. The creak of the door when we finally hung it back in place, straight and true for the first time in 20 years, was the conversation. Frank left for Tennessee on a Saturday morning. I drove him to the bus station myself. He was moving slow that day, his breathing worse than usual, but his eyes were bright in a way I'd never seen them. He carried a single suitcase and a manila envelope full of letters his daughter had sent him over the past months. Photographs of grandchildren he'd never met. A drawing of a house with a yellow sun in the corner, signed for Grandpa in a child's wobbly handwriting. You'll call when you get there, I said. Yes, ma'am. And you'll tell her the truth. All of it. Even the hard parts. Yes, ma'am. And you'll let her be angry if she needs to be. You'll let her yell and cry and say things she doesn't mean. You'll sit there and take it, because she's earned that. She's earned the right to be furious at the father who let her think he was dead. Frank looked at me. His eyes were wet, but he was smiling. You're very bossy, you know that? I've been told. Daniel's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him. Now get on that bus before I start crying and make a scene. He hugged me. It was a careful hug, mindful of his cane and his fragile bones, but it was real. He smelled like menthol and cheap coffee and the faint ghost of a life he was finally getting back. I couldn't have done this without you, he said. You could have. You just needed someone to remind you. He pulled back and looked at me for a long moment. You ever think about what you're going to do now? Now that the fight is over? I hadn't thought about it. Not really. For 6 months, every waking moment had been consumed by Vera, by the investigation, by the trial, by keeping my son alive and my farm intact. I hadn't let myself think about what came after. After was a luxury for people who weren't in survival mode. I'll figure it out, I said. I always do. Maybe you should come visit. Once I get settled. Nashville's nice this time of year. Maybe I will. He climbed onto the bus. I watched through the window as he found his seat, as he stowed his suitcase, as he settled in for the long ride south. Just before the bus pulled away, he raised his hand to the window. I raised mine back. The bus disappeared around the corner. The station was quiet. A single pigeon pecked at a discarded pretzel near the vending machines. The ticket agent was reading a paperback with a torn cover. I stood there for a long time, alone with my thoughts and my dog tags and the strange, hollow feeling of a mission finally complete. 2 months later, on a Sunday morning, I sat in an empty church pew and listened to the silence. It was the same church where Vera had walked down the aisle in her white dress and her borrowed diamonds. The same church where Frank had sat 3 rows back, waiting for his moment. The same church where my son's world had collapsed and, slowly, begun to rebuild. I came here sometimes now, not for services, but for the quiet. The stained glass. The smell of old hymnals and floor wax. The way the light fell across the altar in colors that felt like prayer even when I had no words. I wasn't sure I believed in God anymore. Not the way I used to, back when Tom was alive and the world made sense. Too much had happened. Too much cruelty. Too many good men dead while monsters walked free. But I believed in silence. I believed in sitting still and letting your thoughts settle like dust after a storm. I believed that some questions didn't need answers, they just needed to be asked. The door opened behind me. Footsteps echoed on the stone floor. I didn't turn around. I knew those footsteps. I'd been hearing them for 34 years, ever since a tiny boy in footy pajamas learned to walk on a farmhouse floor. Daniel slid into the pew beside me. He was wearing a button-down shirt and his good jeans, the ones without holes. Church clothes. He hadn't worn church clothes in years. Linda told me you'd be here, he said. Linda tells everyone everything. She said you've been coming here a lot. Since the trial. I didn't answer. The stained glass above the altar showed Christ with his arms outstretched, light streaming through the colored panes in shades of red and blue and gold. I'd stared at that window 1,000 times. It never looked the same twice. I've been thinking, Daniel said. Dangerous habit. About what you said. In the barn. About Dad and the trust and wanting to protect me. He paused. About second chances. I turned to look at him. His face was serious, but there was something else there too. Something that looked like hope. I met someone, he said. The words hung in the air between us. I felt my whole body go still. Before you say anything, he continued quickly, it's not serious. Not yet. We've had coffee 3 times. She's a teacher at the elementary school. She moved here last year from Minnesota. She's got a dog and a vegetable garden and she's not in a hurry for anything. I said nothing. My heart was beating too fast. The dog tags were warm in my hand. I had Linda run a background check, Daniel said. Before the first date. I'm not making the same mistake twice. She's clean. No criminal record. No secret husbands. No mysterious accidents in her past. She's just a nice woman who likes kids and grows excellent tomatoes. Tomatoes, I said. The heirloom kind. Purple ones. I didn't even know tomatoes came in purple. I started to laugh. I couldn't help it. The sound bounced off the stone walls and came back to me, strange and unfamiliar, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. You had Linda run a background check on your date. After what happened, are you surprised? I shook my head. No. No, I'm not surprised. I'm proud of you. You learned. I had a good teacher. The laughter faded. The silence came back, but it was a different silence now. Warmer. Less empty. What's her name? I asked. Sarah. Sarah Whitman. Does she know? About Vera? About everything? Daniel nodded. I told her on the second date. Figured it was better to get it out of the way early. If she was going to run, I wanted her to run before I got attached. What did she say? She said, and I quote, "Your mother sounds like a badass." I laughed again, harder this time. The stained glass Christ looked down at me with his outstretched arms, and I wondered if he was laughing too. Tom would have been laughing. Tom would have loved this moment. Tom would have already invited Sarah over for meatloaf and interrogated her about her tomato-growing techniques. When do I get to meet her? I asked. Next Sunday. If you're ready. I thought about it. Was I ready? Was I ever going to be ready? The last woman my son brought home had tried to kill me. The last wedding I attended had ended with FBI agents and handcuffs. The last time I'd trusted someone with my son's heart, it had nearly destroyed him. But fear was not a way to live. I'd learned that in a combat hospital 40 years ago, holding the hands of dying soldiers who'd faced their fears and lost. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was being afraid and doing the thing anyway. Next Sunday, I said. Tell her to bring some of those purple tomatoes. I want to see them for myself. Daniel smiled. It was the first time in months that his smile reached his eyes. I'll tell her, he said. He stood up and offered me his hand. I took it. We walked out of the church together, through the door that always stuck on humid days, into the afternoon sunlight. The parking lot was empty except for Daniel's truck and a single crow perched on the hood, watching us with its head tilted. One more thing, Daniel said. What's that? Frank called. He's in Nashville. He met his grandchildren. He said the little one, the 4-year-old, asked him if he was a ghost. He said no, he was just a grandpa who took a very long trip. She said, okay, and gave him a sticker. I pictured Frank in a living room somewhere, a child's sticker on his shirt, his kind eyes full of tears he was too stubborn to shed. The man who'd been dead for 3 years. The man who'd crawled out of a cold lake with 2 broken legs and lived long enough to meet his grandchildren. Good for him, I said. Good for all of us. We got in the truck. Daniel started the engine. The radio came on, some country song about heartbreak and redemption and a dirt road leading home. We drove past the soybean fields, past the diner with its spinning pie case, past the VFW hall where the Friday fish fry was already setting up. We drove past everything I'd spent 6 months fighting to protect. When we pulled into the farmhouse driveway, Linda was sitting on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and 3 glasses. She raised a hand in greeting. Her glasses were pushed up on her head and she had a stack of papers on her lap, because Linda never went anywhere without paperwork. Took you long enough, she called. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. The ice is melting. What's all that? I asked, nodding at the papers. Linda paused. 2 full seconds. Then she smiled. Just some documents. Nothing that can't wait until after we've had our tea. I climbed the porch steps and sat down in the rocking chair that had been Tom's. Daniel leaned against the railing. Linda poured 3 glasses of tea and handed them around. The ice clinked. The dogs flopped down at our feet. I looked out at the farm. The corn was tall now, almost ready for harvest. The barn door hung straight and true. The fence post had been fixed. The loose board on the porch no longer creaked. There was still work to do. There always would be. The roof needed patching before winter. The tractor had been making a funny noise. The trust documents needed updating, now that Daniel was dating again. But those were tomorrow's problems. Today, I had iced tea and my son and my best friend. Today, I had survived everything the world had thrown at me and I was still here. Mom, Daniel said, what are you thinking about? I took a sip of tea. It was cold and sweet and perfect. Linda had added mint from her garden, the way she always did. I'm thinking, I said, that your father would be proud of you. And that I'm proud of you. And that whatever happens next, we're going to be all right. Daniel raised his glass. To being all right. Linda raised hers. To being all right. I raised mine. The sun was warm on my face. The dogs were snoring. The corn rustled in the breeze. To being all right, I said. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. The screen door slapped shut behind us as we went inside for dinner. The third board on the porch still creaked when I stepped on it. I made a mental note to fix it tomorrow, or maybe the day after, or maybe never. Some things were better left a little broken. They reminded you of where you'd been and what you'd survived and how far you still had to go. The kitchen smelled like meatloaf. The crispy edges were perfect. Daniel did the dishes while Linda and I sat at the table, going over the papers she'd brought. Trust updates. Property lines. A letter from the insurance company confirming that the farm was secure. Heard from Frank again, Linda said, glancing at her phone. He wants to know if we're coming to Nashville for Christmas. Tell him we'll think about it. You said that last time. I'll say it next time too. She laughed. Daniel flicked dishwater at me. I threw a dish towel at his head. The dogs barked, confused but happy. Outside, the sun set over the soybean fields, painting everything gold. And I sat there in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd stared at a photograph of a dead woman 6 months ago and felt my world tilt sideways, and I realized something strange and wonderful. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the future. Not of being alone. Not of whatever came next. I'd faced a monster and won. I'd protected my son and my farm and my life. I'd found friends I didn't know I had and strength I didn't know I possessed. The dog tags were cool against my chest. I touched them once, lightly, and then let them go. It was enough. After everything, it was finally enough.